So I'm so happy to be hosting Robin Guarino today, who's one of my dearest friends and one of the people I respect most in the world. And I'm so happy that she can be with us today to share her wisdom and her outlook on music and such. So I wanted to start first to talk about talent identification because Robin has been so active in identifying great talent for a long time, both as the head of the opera department of one of the country's most important music schools, CCM, and as a judge in major competitions and as a director of very important and fabulous opera productions all over the world. So, Robin, when you are looking to cast a singer, let's talk about casting first. How do you identify who you think it would be best for a role?
Well, oh, that's a complex question.
I know it is.
I mean, we're looking for deep and profound people who work in our art form. I mean, I think that generally you and I are going to be listening to people on a certain level. So, beyond that, whether they can sing and whether or not their technique is good and languages, etc., and looking for exemplary musicians who basically understand what it is to interpret and serve the score, great collaborators, and people with a depth of intelligence and also the ability to think outside the box and be adventurous and engage in a collaborative ensemble like atmosphere.
Well, it's hard to be able to discern all of that in a 5-minute audition, of course.
Well, I mean, you understand that over time. I mean, I
Uh-huh.
think it's you and I both have informed guts,
Yeah.
and so we don't have to question whether the note values or whether the music's sung correctly. I mean, I think we're looking for a unique voice,
Mhm.
someone who moves us because they're unafraid, standing at the front line, and have something to say and something to
Yes.
communicate of value beyond just singing notes and speaking words.
To me, that's the most important thing, the ability to communicate and be specific about what they're trying to communicate.
Oh,
And
specificity and intent, absolutely.
and if a note doesn't come out right, or if the voice is not exactly the most beautiful, I don't care as much as I care that they communicate something.
Exactly, it's a human art form.
Yeah.
That's why we like it because it is exciting, unpredictable, flawed, but when gathered through practice and experience and with intelligence and the focus of intent and specificity, that's where you get to the good stuff. And especially, when somebody has something to say and has
Mm-hmm.
spent time with the material. And so that's super exciting to me because you know how it is as a judge, or even when you're hearing auditions, you can listen to 75 people and they all sing perfectly and they have nice voices and they're well trained, and then you get that one person who is unafraid and steps up, and it may not all be perfect but they have something to say.
Right.
And that also, I mean, this is just a basic thing and you and I talk about this a lot. Understand how language functions
Mm-hmm.
and how language function, grammar, syntax, relates to thought process,
Mm-hmm.
right? So how do human beings communicate?
Right. I want to be touched. I want to be moved.
Right. We
I
do.
don't want to be impressed. I mean, impressed is not so interesting to me.
Right.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we know that it's a performative, artificial form,
Right.
but we want that to go away. I mean, Laurence Olivier said we should not be looking or listening to the technique and being able to identify it.
Right.
So,
Yes, right. I want to be convinced of this person totally.
totally.
Totally. And you can, I don't know about you, I can usually tell from even before they start singing, the way they carry themselves and uh,
Yeah.
communicate to us, you too.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's so funny because working as a teaching artist, um, and working at Juilliard and then at CCM, um, you you come across a set of rules often that students bring into the room. I'm not supposed to move my arms. I'm supposed to move my arms. I'm supposed to gesture. I'm not supposed to focus on one thing. I'm never supposed to look at all kinds of the people I'm singing to, all kinds of random rules. And basically, then if you think about the great singers who have inspired us, Krista Ludwig, I'm thinking of because you recently interviewed her, and I've been thinking about her, Teresa Stratas, Edith Piaf,
Mhm.
Simon Keenly side. I'm just
All these
picking
great
on
communicative artists.
all these great communicative artists. If you look at them, at some point they're all breaking rules that
Uh-huh.
we have been given to
Right.
teach. But I think that's a limit in the effectiveness of teachers. Really, is that often someone who's not a good teacher will put someone in a sort of cage of rules instead of really focusing on the essential things, which our language communication, really understanding how to read the score, and then how to be a truthful performing artist.
So this sort of takes me into the next thing I want to talk to you about. Um, I sort of skipped something. I'll come back to the other, but your mentorship when you have chosen these fabulous talents to take on at your school and to work with. Uh, so do you deal with each person differently, or do you just how do you go about this?
Well, you have to assess what people's strengths are and what their, I hate to use weakness or deficit, but what are the things that they want, that they need to, or they want to grow to fill in what they're doing? Is it language? Is it rhythm? Is it, or do they have everything in it? They just need a book list or someone
Mhm.
to talk to and process. And I like to make sure that uh, they're getting excellent information. Right?
Mhm.
That's the absolute. That's why the teacher is the most important thing.
Right,
They have to be someone who is an expert in whatever the field is. But you assess what they need, and
right.
and then you give them space to practice and to develop themselves. And my
Yes.
biggest concern is that my students leave me with a sense of what their practice is, what works for them, constructive process, and they are truthful with themselves, so they
Mhm.
know to discern between doing a 3 hour ineffective practice session and a half an hour effective practice session.
Mhm.
And we all know that. And to be able to build a truthful dialogue with ourselves, because that is then can be transferred to any individual you work with.
Yes.
And some of it is just doing the work that you say you're going to do in the time you say you're going to do it in, and showing up and being responsible. Who was it who said? I think it was Spencer Tracy that said, being a professional, being successful is showing up, being on time, and doing the job you're asked to do.
Well, exactly, it's true, but you've actually got to have a lot of structure in place within yourself, and as you said, honesty and courage too.
To do it. But
Right.
my students, I mean, I just had this conversation with Sherry Greenewald, who led the Marilla program and the San Francisco Opera Center and Adler, and she said, Robin, don't you know that I always knew that I could take a director from your program? They're so well taught, and I thought, God, how do you teach a director? But I think it's really true. You tell them what they're responsible for, and what the steps are. I mean, how to analyze and use the sword as the score as your sword and shield, and then what the expectations are. I'm not going to get inside their minds about creativity.
Mhm.
It's my job to understand what their language is and to help them be develop a cohesive language or identify that.
Over
So
time, I've found more and more that I feel part of my job is to give people permission to
yeah,
experiment and be who they are,
right,
and express, even go out on a limb and go far, and then we analyze it together.
right. I mean, it's so funny. One of my students who is now becoming a very successful director and who well, Marcus Shields. I mean, Marcus, I could not teach him anything specifically, but I could set up a system of response. I could give him the resources and the tools that he needed, and a space and singers to work with. And then I became a dialogue partner. Very rarely did he ask me to solve a problem. I mean, he would ask me to look at something, and he would identify what he saw as being a problem, and then we would discuss potential ways to create, distraction or counterpoint, or whether to rely on a certain specific stagecraft or just to let the music do its job. But each student is different, and they needed different things, and we're not there to fix them. Or to identify, you got to give them enough room to.
Yes. And do you work the same way with your singer students as your directors?
Every singer is different,
Mhm.
and it's been interesting in the world of the pandemic, because we taught at some point exclusively online, and I had 26 singers that I was working with an hour a week, so that was quite a significant schedule. But each one needed something different.
Mhm.
What I found that the Zoom format gave me was the ability to get into depth with language and or text, and also the kind of focus that you have in that room. And I realized that an integration of one-on-one teaching in classroom, like a classroom or a seminar laboratory, is a really good thing, and that perhaps we need to do more one-on-one coaching, because a lot of it was just about developing a process and a way of thinking about things. And it also allowed me to do a lot more language work. I mean, really sentence structure, grammar, syntax, and then to talk about what are all the ways that text functions. Like the work that we're doing, the Boulanger is a symbolic work, symbolic text, and so a lot of the text functions on a symbolic level. But when you're taking an ordinary text, you can ask: is it functioning as subtext? Is it functioning metaphorically? Is that person lying? Are they actually saying something in order to get the opposite effect? And that gives the singer, in terms of like their brain process, a lot of flexibility in finding their own unique message.
Right. And there are also a lot of you can get a lot of that information from the musical cues as well.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the other thing is, like, in fact, I was working with a composer and librettist, and we're trying to. There's a lot of writing, and there's a lot of really good writing, but as we know, good writing or playwriting does not make a good opera. And we talked about the use of repetition, and also leaving space for the music to communicate, and trusting that the composer would need space
Mhm.
to
And so
communicate.
do the characters.
Yeah, exactly. And so do the characters.
Right. So we have, and the singers themselves, I think, have got to be thinking what's going through the character's mind in the given amount of space.
Right. Well, that's really interesting to me, is talking about thought process. And I spend a lot of time with singers talking about um, how do you construct a mind palace? How do you identify thought process, not only in yourself, but in other actors, and the system of response, but also integrating the senses into the experience of being there, being in the room, and acting, because they play a very big part in what it is to be a human being, right? There is, you know, not only, I mean, if you take apart the senses, like the sense of smell and the sense of taste and the visual sense and the auditory sense, the way they function in a human being keeps us safe, but
Mhm.
it also opens us up to opportunity. I'm walking past, my favorite ice cream place, and I look at it and go, "Oh, wow, I love ice cream. I'm going to go in there." Or, a bright light or a car comes by, or a noise, and I hear it or I see it and I react, and therefore I'm able to keep myself safe.
Mhm.
So, it, sort of really starting to understand and tune the senses. Once you start to do that in a room, you think really differently of Juliet coming into the tomb, right?
Right.
It's dark, she can't see, it's damp, it's musky, um, you know,
And
it's.
then do you uh, then there's this next step is how to communicate that to an audience, or do you not bother with that? Do you just let?
I think sensory aware
Hmm.
is the first
Hmm.
step of
Right,
being a human being, because it is giving you information that you're responding to, right?
right.
And the music is part of that too.
Sure. We don't
It's
want semaphore, of course.
We don't want semaphore or indication or
Hmm.
overacting or performative acting,
Right, exactly.
but
That's the thing.
sometimes just standing there and being a human being in space and listening and taking in that is what that moment needs. Like
Hmm.
in the Boulanger, there the symbolism, unlike the Pelléas and Mélisande, is about sun and heat and scorching desert. And so, what is it like to look at the sun? What
Hmm.
is it like for it to be so burning, sizzling hot? Do you hear large, the locusts, the
Hmm. Hmm.
cicadas, the buzzing sound? So it just, I think that the director's most important job is to remind the actor what it is to be a human being in the context of the play.
Right,
And how do you do that? You fill them with metaphor.
right.
You don't tell them what to do.
No,
My
you do
God.
develop awareness.
Yes, yes.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's so interesting. I think that's so great. So we're helping people self-actualize in a way
Yes,
within the
yes,
characters. It's so
yes.
beautiful. I love that. So I don't want to rush forward because everything you say is so interesting, but I do want to talk about the Boulanger. I want to find out what attracted you to this project.
Well, I mean, the first thing is she's one of the greatest teaching artists
Right.
of our time,
Probably of all time.
of all time.
Mhm.
And she
And she's a she.
made, she made a definite choice to put her composition aside, I think in one way to make room for her sister, but also because she was very hard on herself and very, a hard critic and judge. But I love the musical language. I love the symbolism of
Mhm.
the text. I love the fact that it's a four-hander with with small chorus, and that the world that it evokes. I also like the idea of working on a symbolist piece that is not all about darkness and water and not
Uh-huh.
no.
Not Peleas.
No, well, yeah, exactly
I mean,
not.
we love Peleas, but still. Uh-huh.
And there's something deeply erotic and deeply, I don't know, talk about standing, in the middle of the desert on the front line to the elements.
Right. But
Um,
we've got four people who each are harboring serious secrets,
mhm.
right? And that they don't often want to admit even to themselves.
No, exactly,
I mean,
exactly, and the sort of the the intensity and the microcosm of their attraction for one another, and sort of crossing into unknowns and forbidden territory
right, unknowns within themselves as well,
within
and forbidden
themselves,
with society and to themselves.
within the structure of their relationships with one another.
Exactly. It's so great. It's so rich
Yeah,
and so real in a way.
yeah. I mean, I think the challenge will be taking this musical space, which sometimes feels a little bit static and moves at a wholly. It's like watching a glacier move.
Mhm.
Of course, glaciers move a little quicker. Is that to find specificity and definition, right? Because you're not in a strict a narrative, and you're
Mhm.
also you move freely from psychological to archaeological to epic to personality to psychological to um, really also reading a play within a play. And so those things attract me to it.
What I
Also,
thought
working with you, Neil.
Well, yeah, we love that. One thing that I thought was so interesting is when we were auditioning singers, it's always interesting auditioning singers together. But in this piece particularly, the second somebody that was sort of performative,
Yeah,
that then it just they were out. It
they
just
were out.
yeah.
Well, it was this also close affinity to language, and
Mhm.
but also I don't know. It was a kind of, I don't know, a gut spiritual thing. Like
Mhm.
that person can exist in this space,
Right.
and of course you probably share, well, we share this, I think, opera and vocal arts, it's a human art form, and you can study it in a book or watch it, but really it's taught by people, and it's taught by the human experience. And um, singers have been my most important mentors throughout life, and and so when you find yourself in a room with a person like that who captivates you and harnesses energy and is a profound person, but also committed to the rigor of this art form, which, is
Which
more
we've
than
devoted our lives to.
we've devoted our lives to. It is exciting. It
Mhm.
raises the hair on your arms.
Exactly. And it brings us to a new level too.
Hmm.
Inspires us.
Yeah.
This is beautiful. Robin, this is so great. I don't want to take any more of your time right now, but you inspire me constantly and I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for giving me so much of your time today, because I think it'll inspire others too.
Yeah.
And at least to think more about these things that I think are really important and what will help people improve themselves and improve themselves as singers and open up their lives in different ways.
Hmm.
So,
It's so funny. This is just by the way. I had a student who was working really hard on language, and so we would try and speak in German. We would try and speak in Italian with one another, but she was hitting a wall, and we talked about, watch some films, watch French films, watch the news, read the newspaper, all of the things that you do to break up, learning vocabulary and memorizing verb tenses.
mhm.
And then I told her this story about going to Amsterdam while I was living in Germany and studying really, really hard at the Goethe Institute, and going to Amsterdam and having fun with some friends for 10 days, and then coming back, and all of a sudden my German was fluent. And that sometimes, the remedy or the thing that gets better is not obvious.
Mhm.
And that's why this art form is also so, it's so interesting, because you can practice, you can just, you can work harder and harder and harder, and that's not necessarily the way to get there.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's just by doing nothing, as Teresa said.
Mhm.
Teresa Strada said to me once, "Honey, the hardest thing to do is nothing."
Mhm. Well, it's also evanescent anyway.
Yeah,
So I think I totally agree with you. And I always say the purpose of technique is so that you can throw it away.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
In both acting technique and singing technique and everything that we spend so much time teaching people, the
Yes,
goal of it is so that they imbibe it and inhabit it and then don't think about it anymore.
right. No, it's exactly.
And communicate, communicate, communicate.
Communicate. Yeah, like, what is it? Never stop asking, why did the composer write that? Why did the librettist write that? I mean, that's the other thing that we didn't talk about. Since since I've been working on developing new works, etc., right? And
Mhm.
we've developed 19 new works with Opera Fusion New Works, and watching and being part of the collaborative process of a librettist and composer, and realizing really in minute detail that every single word, hopefully every scene, every is there for a reason and has a certain function, that nothing is arbitrary when you get into those. I mean, look at Mozart and De Ponte, but there are some really great composers that you and I know well, and taking the knowledge of working on something like that and then bringing it back to the interpretation of the score or looking at a whole opera really gives you a different lens to look at, uh, what character is, what story is, and what the overall musical dramaturgy is.
So the process of being a dramaturg has inspired you.
Oh, God, yes, totally. It really has. I love it.
Mhm.
Well, I love being at the front line. I love working with composers and librettists. And
Yeah, it's all about growth. It's all about our growth. It's about the growth of the people we work with and us growing together
yeah,
too. I
exactly.
love it. And I love you. Thank you
I
so
love you
much,
too.
Robin. I appreciate it.